The strategy of just saying, hey, you have to use AI. I promise it will make you more efficient, or we will get more done as a company if you use AI isn't very effective. It's much more effective to find, hey, you're really frustrated by this step in your workflow that takes you hours every week. Let's figure out how we can use these new tools to make that automated or make that an enjoyable part of your week.
Welcome to the Information Week Podcast. I'm your host, Senior Editor, Joe Papp. Today's episode, we are discussing, what does it take as a CIO or CTO to build up your IT leadership teams in this era of AI rising? Skills and tools have certainly changed within the recent years and recent year and months, along with the objectives with AI, taking new heights. So, how does C-suite tech leaders build up leaders within their teams? So for today's episode, we are joined by Art Hugh, who is the global CIO for Lenovo. Art, good to be seeing you again.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, JP.
We're also joined by Marc Kermisch, Chief AI and Technology Officer for Protolabs. Marc, good to be seeing you. Thank you for joining us. Mm-hmm. And we're also joined by Joe Papp, CTO and co-founder of Anthro Energy.
Great to be here, JP.
Okay, great. All right, so gentlemen, so AI, of course, it's still a bit of a frontier that is being navigated, and there's different ways that you might be looking to navigate things. So have there been recent hires that you've looked to or have brought on board that have helped kind of like change the way your teams have been operating, opening up new ideas and new directions that you might be taking with AI and other innovations? Art, why don't you start us off with your perspectives on that?
Yeah. Absolutely. I think what goes hand in hand with this is also some of the context, right? Around the theme of building up new leadership teams. A big part of this is not we're just hiring business as usual, but that we're doing so because we're at the frontier that everyone's trying to explore. And so bringing in the new right hires at all levels are required. And I think what I've observed with some of the recent hires that we've made at more senior levels is that they bring in a much stronger sense of the state of the possible, the art of the possible in a sense. And that really opens the aperture to help people understand, wow, these things are really possible. When we talk about the level of automation, right, managing multiple agents that then manage agents, that then recursively manage agents, and the ability to get work done, I think that can be very eye-opening to have someone on the team who's already been there, has been at the frontier, and is then going to help pull the rest of the team along. So I think those two things we acknowledge there's a lot to be learned, there's a lot to be learned, but bring in people who have experienced what it could be like, I think is quite a jolt of energy that's very positive to the leadership dynamic.
Joe, how about you within your teams?
Yeah, definitely. I think, at Anthro, where we're a deep tech startup where we have a ton of experts in their field across many different functions. It's often tempting to think of AI as we introduce it as a whole separate initiative. But I think what I've learned for the leaders who have really moved the needle, they're the ones who don't think of our AI transformations as separate, but as an inherent piece of the strategy within their unique function. So I think what this has meant for hiring is really looking at people who aren't just focused on the result of their work or on the product, but people who are comfortable really owning the process. And so people who are comfortable iterating on their workflows and treating the how as just as exciting and important as the final product. And I think these people who are really excited about the process are the ones that we're seeing the fastest efficiency gains with, and the ones that are really making a difference in terms of our AI transformation.
Gotcha. Marc, maybe you can chime in on this and get your perspective, but kind of pick up on that sense of owning the product. Has the idea of ownership changed in this AI era? And Art and Joe, if you can actually add in as well, has that sense of ownership and responsibility changed with that tool?
I think what's really interesting about AI is the democratization of access to technology, right? Where before, each one of our functions kind of had to act as a gate to be able to build software and capabilities for the company. And now, we're primarily a manufacturer. Now my manufacturing engineering teams, who are mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, don't know how to code, can now write code to solve their own problems, right? And so we've got teams out there now that are building, applications to fill gaps in process, to fill gaps in some of our packaged software, to create new offerings for our customers. And so this democratization of technology that AI is giving us has been a tremendous value add and productivity boost, as well as an employee engagement enhancement to our organization.
Gotcha. Joe, any follow up in terms of that idea of
I
responsibility?
really love that, because that's one of the other cultural elements that I think is such a large change that it'll actually take several years and be at the forefront of how technology teams define themselves. I think Marc made a great point of, historically, the tech teams have been a gatekeeper because they were the only ones gated by skill availability that was scarce to create capabilities for the enterprise. And now you put that in the hands of everyone. So at Lenovo, for example, we have 80,000 employees, but the tech teams are just a couple thousand people. And so you go from something that's relatively scarce, of a small percentage, relatively speaking, of the company that is creating capability, into 100%. And so the IT team actually now needs to grow an entire different operating mindset, an entire different kind of enterprise AI operating system to go empower, rather than gatekeep or just do governance and have people wait in queues for capabilities. And that is never before happened to IT teams, right? They're used to being the scarce resource. They're used to being on the critical path. And how do you open this up so that you aren't, and you can actually empower 100% of the organization to create meaningful capability, as Marc was saying, is a huge shift, not just in mindset, but then in the way you work and the tools and the governance for the company.
Yeah, I completely agree with Marc. And I think one additional perspective that I've found exciting is that AI has allowed me personally to have a much broader insight and perspective into the company. I don't know if my team likes this, but it's enabled me to dive in and actually start doing some technical work that before I never had the time to do. And this has been exciting and also engaging with the team and throughout the organization. So it's not just the individual contributors who I think are enabled by this, but it's also leaders throughout the company. And it has enabled us to really embrace this more of a lead by example strategy within Anthro too, where experts who have been promoted to management now actually can scratch that technical itch and dive into technology much more easily than they used to be able to.
Sorry, just quickly on that one, because I love that point so much, which is, I think we don't talk about enough that this has to be a full contact exercise in sport. What Joe said, we talk a lot about, well, let's 5x, 10x the productivity from quote unquote the company, but you don't hear executives and leaders talking about as much, hey, how did I 2x myself? Did I 5x myself? How can I reach deeper and have more impact? So I really think that's an important point.
I think it's a great point, Art. And I was literally going to build on that, because oftentimes I find myself sharing how I use AI every day as a leader, right? And I would say, like, I'm adding probably 4 or 5 hours to my day because I'm able to get so much more done, right? Which is, 20 plus hours a week. And so I'm, literally getting 1.5 times the value of my time because of it. And being able to sit down with your engineering team, your executive team, a middle management team, and say, here's 5 things I do every day with AI. Here's 10 things my teams are doing with AI. Like, it is challenging the org to embrace it.
Okay. Speaking of embracing it, have you had to work with, say, the team members who might have struggled with adapting to this AI transformation era? How do you address those? Like, either it could be personal reluctance, or just kind of getting their AI legs under them, so to speak. Marc, why don't you lead us off with your perspective?
It's been interesting, because having the title of AI in my organizational title has led to some assumptions like, oh, Marc is here to automate the jobs out of our organization. Right. And so I've had to take a step back and say, it's not about automating the jobs out. I often say, those that leverage AI are more likely to take a job of somebody who doesn't leverage AI at all and puts their head in the sand. And so when I meet somebody who's got friction or resistance, it's often because they haven't even taken the first step of trying. right? Especially for non-technologists, right? Somebody in the customer service space or in a marketing space, or even sales. And so I have to kind of boil it down to like, what can they understand? And so usually the first thing I do is like, hey, hop out, take out your phone, let's download one of the main apps. Let's go snap a picture of something and just ask it to describe you. Let's go outside and say, you don't know what that tree is. Take a picture of the tree and ask what it is. And it's showing him in small ways, like this isn't a tool that can do your job. This is a tool that can enhance you and make you gain insights that can help support our customers or help you support your boss or complete your task faster. And so I think it's ultimately coming down and meeting that individual where they are and trying to raise them up with the utilization of these tool sets that are available to us now.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. What I've seen at Anthro as well is the strategy of just saying, hey, you have to use AI. I promise it will make you more efficient, or we will get more done as a company if you use AI isn't very effective. It's much more effective to find, hey, you're really frustrated by this step in your workflow that takes you hours every week. Let's figure out how we can use these new tools to make that, automated or make that an enjoyable part of your week. And that has been much more effective. I think an interesting thing for us as like a deep tech company focused on battery engineering, polymer chemistry, we have a bunch of experts in their field that are used to using the tooling that has existed for quite some time. I think these folks are where, at least internally, we see some distrust of AI that they might not believe is generating accurate results, or they just don't feel like they can fully trust. So I think I haven't been trying to push these people out or to say, hey, you have to use AI. I think it's really important within our organization for our culture to acknowledge that, hey, some people will be slower to adopt. Some of these technologies that are deeply rooted and have been using the same methods for a long time and haven't been directly tackled by AI might take longer to adopt. And that's okay. There's a non-uniform adoption. I think there are some really easy wins within our organization that we can make and then showcase. And it's okay if there are some people that are a little bit farther behind. I think the important thing for us has been acknowledging that, hey, we're all going to adopt and let AI transform our work. But it's okay if it's not uniform.
Yeah, and Joe, I really like that point about meeting the employees where they are, right? Because we use the flip side of that to actually create a sense of urgency combined with agency. I think the key part is everyone knows it's coming, right? There's no denying it. So when people want to be reassured because there is like nothing will change, right? You have to tackle that head on. Like things are absolutely changing. Lenovo, right? We do hardware, but we're also now becoming a services company. And so we're at the forefront, right? We see everyday announcements of new capabilities in contact centers and digital engagement. And so people can see it. And so it's helping them change their mindset of, well, I hope nothing happens because no one's going to guarantee the same thing for life. And helping you say, well, would you rather just watch, right, and take a passive role, or would you rather engage? And the urgency, we're helped in some sense of using the tools at our disposal because we've been growing at double digits. And so we say, look, this is a great opportunity to go shape the future, right? And we have the luxury in some sense because we're growing double digits. We don't have to, we can absorb growth, number one. And so we're able to talk and frame it in that, and which we are, right? Which we're growing, we're still adding roles, but at a slower rate because that's the scale from AI. And then the other part is just being practical. I think, for example, employees, right? I was for a lot of teams who are doing a bit more repetitive information work. Then, for example, hey, instead of answering calls half the time, you could become a new kind of raw data to intelligence pipeline engineer, right? To help turn a lot of the data into, because that's the real work, right? Of making sure the data is ready. And so I think giving them agency with the urgency and helping them understand why that's a more positive, right, gets many more people on board.
Yeah, I think maybe one last thing I'd add is, as the next generation of employees come into the workforce, right, which we're seeing now, right, the first grads that had 4 years of AI or 3.5 years of AI utilization, if they're coming in and they're not actually getting access to those tools, they're actually feeling like they're taking a step back in how they can be productive in the workforce, right? So if I've got a brand new college hire is like, hey, where's my Claude subscription? And I'm like, well, for security reasons, we're not giving it out.
Yeah, it's not on the wait list.
My job harder. Yeah, yeah. So like there's that agency and tool that I think we have to be ready. And all of a sudden it's great to see that new college hire come in sitting next to somebody with 7 to 8 or 15 years of experience, and they're looking at each other like, how do you do your work? Well, how are you doing your work? Right. And they start to talk and learn from each other as a groundswell organically versus tops down.
Well, it definitely sounds like you all are not adopting the draconian method that some folks have made headlines about essentially using AI tokens or else, or token maxing, as much as possible. Just your quick perspectives on, is that detrimental to teams to say you've already talked about easing them in or just encouraging them, but the idea of telling them they have to push the pedal to the metal with every AI resource. Do you think that is there a place for that, or is that not?
Yeah, for us, I think it's the outcomes that matter more than the maxing of the tokens, right? And we all hear the term AI slop, and I've seen it, right? Some of the engineers that have run with scissors, now they're going back to have to refactor all this code because they didn't think through how to actually write code now with these AI tools. I think there's a time and place where you want to drive encouragement, but I think if you did a peanut butter spread approach to that, you're going to suffer from the outcomes that you get from it.
I think that's exactly right. It's like what Marc was saying earlier. The more effective strategy is to make sure you're not putting up resistance to the folks that do want to, access these tools and be a part of this AI transformation. We've recently added some members to our team who are, deep experts, not just in chemistry, but machine learning, who have been able to quickly enable some predictive models that allow us to go through our development process, multiple times faster. And these people are sitting literally across the aisle from folks that are doing this experimentation and this iteration in lab that's taking months. And so they're able to talk about the progress they're making in just a matter of days, right next to the folks that are doing the old method that's taking months. And this is really encouraging the adoption. So by enabling the tools, by allowing folks to use new open source models, new data sets that are being provided that they're excited about to accelerate their learning, to accelerate the iteration process. This is slowly, spreading across the whole company, and this excitement about what AI can do is spreading.
Yeah, and I like that because it goes to why I think you can do draconian leadership methods, and they do work, but maybe not the way you think, right? They work in a stable environment where there's a clear best way to get there, right? And if your team isn't doing that, then you can be pretty top down and be confident. But we're in the opposite of that, right? Leaderboards, the metrics, KPIs, they're changing every month, right? So you can absolutely short-term optimize on something, but as we see, that may not be the right thing, and then you're churning your organization quite significantly. So I think the better way, right, as Joe and Marc have talked about, is figuring out how to introduce that organically through some friendly competition, through exposure therapy. Right? We sound like psychologists, but it is really building the mindset, the environment where people understand how they can take agency, take an active role. And that gives you more flexibility towards the outcome orientation, right? Raw tokens, especially as companies are going to pay their economic value for them, I think will drive that shift as well, where you want something much more flexible and organic.
All right. So let's talk about the skills that you're looking for, prioritizing for the potential IT team leaders. What are you looking at that is really something they feel is essential? And, are there particular skills, elements of what, IT leaders in the past really needed to focus on that are maybe not as relevant anymore? Art, why don't you kick us off with your thoughts?
Yeah, a couple of things here. I think one of the biggest things is recognizing that the bar is rising because AI can do average work better than any average could. And so as a result, if your bar and you were kind of a median outputter, right, that is something that AI can probably and almost certainly do better. So I think with that, it means that the constraints to where we started the discussion are shifting of what it means to be a technology contributor, to be a technology leader. And so with constraints shifting, I think systems level thinking is one of the most important ones, which is to say not to get so zoomed in that you're only trying to optimize that one person or that team, but the higher level of questions of well, what's the new configuration of teams? Maybe I don't need a team that looks like that one. I need a different shape of the workflow to go create. And that really requires leaders to level up. And at the other point, I think it really places an additional premium on those at the intersection of not just technology, but with the business context, with the industry trends, right? So the unicorns that I'm looking for are going to have the technical acumen, right? A solid grounding of what's happening, of state of the art on the technology, as well as good domain knowledge. And so I think that combination will become increasingly valuable as the old of, hey, I can just, put out reasonable code by itself becomes less valuable.
Marc, your thoughts, your input on that?
Yeah, I think a couple of things that we're recognizing in the IT management ranks, right? I think it's redefining what it means to be a technologist and how they embrace the broader definition, right? We used to talk about shadow IT and how to control shadow IT, and now it's really about how do we enable the citizen developer that's out there in our business and accelerating the capabilities. The second is, as we're going through the interviewing process, we're enabling the candidates to use AI, but what we're asking them is, show us how your originality gets enhanced in your thinking and your output with AI. And, it changes a bit of the dialogue. So I'm just not seeing an AI created presentation or AI written code. It's how did it actually enhance your original thinking to get there? And then lastly, I would maybe talk about like the intersection of product and technology, where you have the product manager or the technical product manager, where now that TPM can be sitting in a requirements meeting and be vibe coding the application and be able to visibly show back to the business, is this what you meant? Is this how it works? Same thing to the engineer of like, hey, this is what I think the flow needs to look like. Here's what the screen layout might look like. And so we're able to shorten that cycle and have much more engaging product design decisions and discussions than ever before, right? The concept of, a feature written by hand or a Word document of requirements is just going away.
Joe, would you round us out with your thoughts on that?
Sure. Yeah, I think I completely agree with Art and Marc, but when I'm, looking at new candidates, I think a couple of the things that stand out are that, technical fluency isn't the bar anymore. It's much more than that. And I think the some values that I'm starting to really look for are, intellectual honesty about uncertainty. I think some people feel that their use of AI maybe isn't something to discuss, even in an interview or after they've been hired in their work, and they try to hide it or try to hide the uncertainties there. I think what I'm looking for is the people who can be open about that and open to, using the latest tooling that comes with the certain uncertainty. Being able to communicate that is really important. I think the other thing is the ability to work across domain boundaries, exactly as Art said. And then a really, really important one that I mentioned earlier is this comfort with iteration rather than finality. So the people who are really thriving are the people who can come to a result quickly and then iterate on it, because that's the most effective ways to use a lot of these AI tools, as opposed to, slowly and methodically arriving at one single result.
Gotcha. All right. Well, speaking of thriving, we see how you thrive in the tabletop exercise. For those of you who are listening, I've taken out the Ninja Turtles Game Master Screen, which means now it is time for Questionable Ideas, our tabletop exercise where our panelists will serve as interim executives at our fictional company known as Questionable Ideas. The panelists have not seen these scenarios in advance, which may seem over the top, but they do relate to today's topic. As always, my guests are not responsible for the presence of goblins, kobolds, and gremlins in these scenarios. That is entirely my fault. Okay, so once again, the ground rules for Joe, Marc, and Art. You have the same rights, powers, and privileges that you expect as in your executive roles at this fictional company, up to and including calling for outside assistance dealing with the nonsense that is happening. Okay, gentlemen, are you ready?
Oh, yes.
Okay. First scenario. The floor is lava. The CEO of Questionable Ideas wants to ensure the company has a steady cycle of leaders growing within the IT teams. The goblins step up immediately with a plan to challenge engineers and developers to adapt, or else. The goblins want to put the leadership prospects in a room where they must token max their AI resources against a ticking timer, or they will be consumed by lava. Don't ask where the goblins get the lava. The goblins say this will incentivize quick thinking and weed out underperformers who have not kept pace with current IT tools. Do you let the floor is lava plan proceed as is, halt it, or revise it?
I think my first response is, can I use AI to write or hack the system to stop the floor from turning into lava?
Creative option. I like that. I like that.
Or we could just call HR.
Yeah,
HR is also another option.
Definitely call it an HR and don't let that floor turn into lava. I think that is a draconian approach to the interview style. I think it's important to have that as a aspect of assessment. I don't think it's worthwhile, throwing folks into lava if they don't reach the top of the leadership board for token maxing. I think this ability to use tokens efficiently to come to a result is something that should be assessed. I think it's appropriate now and is a skill that should be evaluated. So I would say, hey, goblins, this seems a little extreme. Let's pare this down and use it as an aspect of the process, but let's not go straight to throwing folks into lava.
Yeah, I would modify it, actually. I think there's a couple of things that you could actually use. I like the sense of urgency, right? Because I think the lava certainly injects that, and especially for larger organizations, I think that's often sorely needed. So I think the modification would be, this could be a virtual sim, right? And it's like if the goblins want to come in with us, I think that's, and the business, right? As a company, I think the nature of it's just the IT team and perform or you go to the lava is actually exactly what we've covered a little bit, right? There's none of us here are magicians that say, make the AI happen for the company, right? And so I would be more than happy to do, right, with an executive team. We're all in the sim together, right? And the timeline's a little bit longer, but I think the point of the metaphor of the lava is coming for all of us if we can't figure out the right outcomes at pace. So I like the sense of urgency, right? I think we can adapt it. So, for example, the exec committee or the exec board takes place in the background of creeping lava over time, just right as a mental reminder, right? But I'd love the business in the boat with me.
Exactly. I just want to add, I think what Art is implying is that, this would be much more of a real world scenario involving the whole team as opposed to something fictional or purely based on token maxing. And I think presenting a real world scenario and then allowing them a certain token usage to see what their method is to coming to the appropriate conclusion is a much better style.
Yeah, and maybe even the opposite, right? It'd be interesting to give them, we're going to give you a token limit and you've got to be more efficient in actually having to solve this problem versus token maxing, which could lead to, exuberant outcomes that may not be relevant.
Well, the goblins are definitely not known for worrying about how much things are going to cost when they go token maxing, which is why the CFO went missing a few episodes ago. Okay, well done on that and saving people from the lava. All right, scenario 2, Dungeon Crawler Pearl. The kobolds emerge from the depths of the company's data vaults with a slightly less lethal plan to find new IT team leaders. They want to put potentials in a digital dungeon that actually has no escape, unless the candidates can debug and resolve issues with code written in Perl, Ruby, and of course, COBOL. The kobolds say it is important that IT leaders understand the classics and keep those skills sharp, or they risk becoming too dependent on AI coding and won't be able to lead the teams through issues that may arise. Do you let this plan proceed as is, put a stop to it, or revise it?
I'm happy to get this one started. I think it's a good idea, but the means are probably a little bit misguided, right? Because I think the question is, well, why are we stopping there, right? And I also use this with my team of probably 40, 50 years ago, right? Real people were doing assembly, right? And before that, people were like, well, real people are using machine language. So I think it is, we just need to keep things in perspective. I think the revision that would make this much more useful is, what is the critical thinking necessary and what is the level of hands-on work that is required so that you can remain grounded, so that you can determine and help make judgments around the evaluations on the quality of the work, the quality of the architecture, and the alignment with the business intent. Because I think there's still some things that will require very deep human machine, digital, and we call carbon-based workers, us in the future. Right? So I think the intent makes sense, but probably the COBOLs, they've probably been spending too much time with COBOL.
Yeah, I think maybe building on that, I feel like this was made for me because my first professional applications were all written in Perl. But I think, to Art's point, the assumption I would make is these are old applications that probably have very rooted business processes they support. And so kind of what Joe had said earlier is bringing your business in to this discussion around, is the process still relevant as we fix these bugs, or are there things we need to reimagine? And so we're not just doing what we've always done, but maybe challenging us to say, hey, we can hit these defects, but let's also take a look at that end-to-end process. And is that still working for the company? And then what's that impact on the architecture, like Art talked about, where you might start to reimagine what your business needs truly are?
Yeah, I think I would let this one proceed as well, maybe with some slight modifications. But one thing I like about it is that it somewhat levels out the playing field. I'm not expecting a lot of potentials to have fluency in COBOL. And so you actually do get to assess the way people think and work through a program or problem without being very swayed by folks that have experience in that exact thing previously. So I like that. I think, after they trap a sufficient number of people in the dungeon, I might call in the National Guard to eventually let them out. But I think I'd let
Good. Good. Well done. Good job making sure that no one gets left behind in the dungeons. All right. Great. All right. Last scenario, zero chill. The Gremlins skate into the office with their own leadership vetting plan called Zero Chill. They want to launch a bounty-based challenge to motivate potential IT leaders. The objective, with the support of quantum compute resources that fell off the back of a truck and AI agents, the candidates must break into federal databases, crack crypto accounts, and transfer those funds to questionable ideas without being caught. The Gremlins say this will prove the IT team leaders can make creative use of cutting-edge tools and also lead the defense of the company should outsiders try to hack in. Anyone who fails goes to prison. This plan will be set in motion in the next 30 seconds. Do you let this proceed as is, stop it, or do you modify the zero chill vetting process for IT team leaders?
Well, seeing as success also increases the likelihood of going to prison, and this one I'm going to call stop, and we'll reevaluate how to redirect. Maybe the plot twist we could introduce and it would be, we're actually we have a contract to be the red team with the federal agency in question. Right? That's what I would want to hit pause on and make sure is in place before we proceed.
Yeah, I think immediate stop. And then maybe also, start an investigation into the folks that proposed this as, something nefarious might be going on already.
Right. I mean, it feels more appropriate that it's we all win or we all lose, right? So at least you align the incentives of the group appropriately.
And I, with my commercialization hat on, after we've at least hit the immediate stop, is wow, if we can do that, maybe we can have a real product here, right? And we should actually spin out a company to go commercialize this.
See, sometimes it's better, as the Gremlins say, to ask for forgiveness after you've done something rather than permission to potentially break multiple laws in the process. Right. Okay. Well, listen, gentlemen, you've navigated the scenarios. You've kept people out of prison, out of the dungeon, and out of the lava. Once again, I want to thank you for coming on to the podcast today. Joe, Marc, Art, you've been fantastic. I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Nice to meet everybody.
Most fun I've had in a while.